Welcome everyone to the ZPNC stream. I'm Piara Bamra and I'll be moderating this session. In this session, we've got Brian Hoare from Zitaly, and he'll be talking about taking back control of your mainframe budget. This session is coded session 6BG, so please do keep in mind when you're leaving your session feedback at the end. I'll leave a link in the chat box so that you can direct yourself to the feedback form. We would also really appreciate if you could make a donation to our nominated charities, which is RNLI and Guide Dogs for the Blind. You know, if you've been enjoying the conference so far, if you've been taking any value, we'd appreciate any donation, big or small. In terms of questions and answers, please feel free to leave them in the chat box and Brian will answer them towards the end. So with that in mind, over to you, Brian.
Yara, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And I'm having a look at some of these names, and there's a few that I recognize. Good morning, Mr. Eggleston. How are you? Nah, you're on mute or you're not listening. All right. Welcome, everybody, to my session, and I feel privileged to have been included for this GSE GuideShare conference. I'm going to talk this morning about take back control of your mainframe budget. The reason I picked this subject is that one of the things that I do in my many years working on the mainframe is that I talk to companies about cost, money, where their contracts they have, not only with their ISVs, but also with IBM. And I'll say this right at the very beginning, this is not an IBM bashing session. I don't like to do that. But often people say to me, hey, look, you know, our mainframe is just so expensive. Well, actually, I think the mainframe is really good value for money. And it's not old mainframes. Mainframes are very, very modern technology. It's the applications that are very old. So, you know, when somebody says to you next time around about the mainframe being expensive, no, it's very good value. And I'll show you that as we go through. As for me, I first started out in IT 30 plus years ago, funnily enough, working out of the UK, working for Lloyds Bank. I've stayed fairly true to the mainframe, although I did move over to the dark side, the non-mainframe side for a couple of years, but I came back, I saw the light, so to speak. And I'm now currently, for the last, 15, 16 years, I've been living in the US. So I'll say I may be between you and lunch, you're between me and breakfast. So we're all equal there. All right, let's get going. Let's get started. Oh, there's my ugly mug, but you can see it anyway. All right, couple of GSE UK raffles, or there's a raffle for a couple of very good charities, the lifeboats and the dogs, the guide dogs, which are terrific. And hopefully everybody's wearing their poppy today, as it's the 11th of November, and everybody's donated to that as well. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. A little bit of background about who Zitaly are. We're actually a French company, but I'll come on to that in a sec, based in Nantes. Then we're going to get into some of the challenges and issues out there in cost control, MLC licenses, budget, chargeback, the things that we get through day to day. And as I mentioned earlier, I see a lot of contracts out there, and it's the contracts that are usually a big part of the issue. They're just poorly written. I won't go into that, but I'll give you some examples of how you can improve it. Talk about the 4-hour rolling average, and I'm going to assume everybody here understands how that works. I'm not going to give you a lecture on that, and ways to help manage the defined capacity, and obviously Q&A. All right, Zitaly. Let me just minimize this. Zitaly. We're based in France, in Nantes. Actually, we've got more than 28 employees, very much focused on cost control, cost management, mainframe analytics, which is everybody's getting into these days. Lots of customers. Our renewal rate each year is very high, and we're having exceptional growth at the moment. We started in 2006 by a gentleman called Jackie Hofbauer. What a few of you have probably heard of him, may even have met him. First offer was about helping to manage IBM MLC and a little bit of capacity planning, mainframe analytics, and just about every company is into analytics, but it surprises me because not a lot of mainframe data is used for analytics, which kind of makes me scratch my head because considering what 70 to 80% of all production data touches the mainframe. So why not use it for analytics? End-to-end mainframe observability. What is going on in your mainframe, from performance to tuning to all of your mainframe applications, from what's ZOS doing to CICS to DB2 to WebSphere to WLM, etc., etc. I like this slide because it probably says that I'm a mainframe bigot, but if you look at it, you got 30 billion business transactions per day that go through, 6 trillion in card payments annually. And that's growing. And since the pandemic, I'm sure that's a lot higher than what this is. Lots of the large banks, Piara, who introduced me, he works for Lloyds Bank. They use mainframes. And so do most of the top banks in the world, as it says here. Insurance companies, retailers, and as it says here, 80% of the world's corporate data resides or originates in mainframes. And there's one little bit that's not here, is that the cost of this, most companies' IT budget is a lot less than any other platform. It runs at about 7 or 8% of the company's IT budget. So what are our challenges? Risk, cost, and time. SLAs, let's start with there. That's really important. We must meet our SLAs. And while a lot of organizations, they sit there and they say they work through, and if they have a problem, they use their performance monitor to identify the problem. And that's great. I think performance monitors, whether it's an Omegamon or whether it's a MainView or a SysView, they work. They're really good. They're great at solving that issue, those things that go pop in the night, immediate reaction. That's what they're designed for, to help you get to SLAs. But a lot of problems can be identified much earlier because they tend to trend. So things don't just immediately break. They go gradually downhill. And you can usually avoid a lot of the problems and a lot of the risk. Increasing workloads, digitalization. That's something that, if you look at the statistics before COVID, there was, I read a report, there was about 19% of companies that were actually actively getting into digitalization. There was one done about 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and those numbers are up around about 55, 56%. And that's a lot of the things to do with COVID. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I'll pick out the key ones. Cost, we're always being told, reduce your expenses. Well, as I said, my feeling on that is the mainframe is really good value for money. A lot of the time, it's how the contract was negotiated, and there are things that you can do. Reduce the cost, control your spending, budget freeze. And control the spending is really important. If you're going to understand, if you're going to control your costs, one of the things you've got to be able to manage, and a lot of companies do this very well, is who is spending all the money? Where is all the cost going? Who are the culprits? And if you're on an IBM license like CMP or AWLC, who are the big culprits that are driving up the 4-hour rolling average? Time, lack of new resources, yeah, that is happening. Although a lot of new people that are getting onto the mainframe are not mainframe orientated. And the mainframe is becoming very much, it's just a server. It's part of the toolbox. It's just another piece of kit in the toolbox for the business. A lot of people are retiring, and, lack of attractivity for students. Well, they don't want to see a green screen. They want to see something that's a lot more sexy, a lot more model, a lot more modern. So these are some of the challenges, and as it says there, do more with less. All right, let's talk about the mainframe specifically. What are the big expenses? And it's been like this for since about 2010. Sorry, I've just jumped. IBM MLC is usually the most expensive one. And again, this is not an IBM knocking session. I think IBM did wonders back in the mid 2005, 2006, 2007. They listened to their customers that said the mainframe was expensive. We've got to do something about it. And they introduced lots of different IBM license models. And again, they kind of solved a problem, but they created a new one. And that's because there's so many different license models. People struggle to understand what they actually do and what it actually means to their bill. And we'll come on to that in a second. ISVs, yeah, they make up 10%. In fact, they probably make up a little bit more. The OTC products from IBM, yep, they're all good. People costs, that's probably the one that's coming down year on year in, because they're all retiring. You know, they're either the no hair or the grey hair brigade, a little bit like myself. I've still got my hair, as you can see, but it's very grey these days. Hardware, other, yeah, that's acceptable. So the issues, software, how often are we told? Shrinking budget, reduced personnel, people retiring. Need to understand what you are spending and who is driving up those expenses. Who are the culprits that are doing this? The old saying, or the adage, you can't manage what you can't measure. So if you can't understand or identify who is driving up your bills, then you're going to be struggling. And I will say IBM have done very well with this, in the sense that they brought out tailor fit pricing, TFP, which has helped a lot of companies. But we'll come on to TFP in a minute. As I say, this is not an IBM knocking session. I think they've done really well. They've listened and they've acted. Cost control, where do you start? IBM hardware, application and system performance, yeah, that can always be improved, but you know, a lot of these applications are very old. Although a lot of the applications, and I won't go into that on this session, but API management, a lot of companies are getting their non-Z, are extracting mainframe data for non-Z applications using APIs. Everybody's talking about them at the moment over this side of the pond. Database performance, zips, networks, integration. One thing I have noticed about the UK, although I don't live there anymore, as I've said, a lot of the companies there are outsourced. And if you are outsourced, a lot of companies, when they get into their outsourcing agreement, lose their zips or their specialty processes. And that's another session that I talk about, not today, but you know, I often ask why, because you know, we don't get charged anything for workload that runs on a zip. If we lose them, we're going to get charged for that workload. Non-Z integration, I mentioned APIs, but as I said, don't get me started on that one, because I think it's really everybody's talking about it over here. Cloud, and top of the tree is IBM MLC. This is where you can get your biggest cost savings. All right. Software cost is a complex part of the TCO. IBM MLC, there's going to be some form of IBM agreement, whether it's AWLC, whether it's CMP, whether it's TFP, whether it's VUE. And even when you talk about things like TFP, currently there's five different flavors of it. And IBM are great because they often rename an existing one anyway, an existing license model. So it can get very confusing, and you know, it's hard to keep track of it. So understand what your Z commitments are and what your expenses are. I mentioned about IBM MLC. Type of IBM license you use, what are the effects of it, and do some contract negotiation, or even there are people out there that will help you negotiate not only with IBM, but the ISVs. Does your organization use, most of them have a budget, I hope, but do they use chargeback? And that's a good way to keep control of who is spending your resources. And as I mentioned earlier, what workload contributes to the 4-hour rolling average. Contract negotiation is not easy either. And I'm going to give you a couple of tips. There's a couple of IBMers on this, so they'll be interested to hear this, I'm sure. How to negotiate with IBM, and I've done a fair amount of this over the years. What pricing models are best for us? I've got some that I think are absolutely awful, but I think there's some of them are really good. Some contracts also require commitments. And one thing I will say about negotiation here, IBM have become much more creative, and they're very good. I will say that. But some contracts that you may have, if you don't meet the requirement, there are penalties. So again, if you are going to enter into one of these agreements that requires a commitment, just go careful to make sure that you've done your due diligence so that you know what your penalties are if you overachieve or you underachieve. All right, MLC costs, consumption measured once a month. If you're on a CMP or an AWLC or one of the TFP flavors, you send the report to IBM. Most people know it as the SCRT report or scratch report or skirt report. Somebody said that to me the other day, which I hadn't heard it called that. You send it. Now, just remember that within the SCRT, there is an area that if you've had a massive overage that month, you can fill in, I think it's the P5, I can never remember it, but it's a section in there that if you think you've had an overage for something that's gone on in your organization that wasn't completely your responsibility, you can complain to IBM or write it in there to IBM. IBM will look at it and then they will review it. And often, as long as it's not, you don't do this regularly, but IBM will then recalculate your bill for you. And I really do say this sincerely. IBM are very good at this, and they're very honest. They're very good. Compute the bill, you come back to it, and you get it in maybe, we've said 1 to 2 months. I think it's more like, 6 to 10 weeks, you'll get the bill back. However, if you then try and dispute your bill, you're done. You have to do it when you send the report to IBM, not when you receive the bill. And again, a lot of organizations, when they run their SCRT, they just look at the MSUs that they've used for each of, ZOS, CICS, DB2, etc. They say, yeah, that's about the same as last month. So the bill should be about the same amount. No, that's not strictly true because it depends on how much has been contributed to the 4-hour rolling average. So again, please just, it would be really nice to know what the exact dollar amount or pound amount or euro amount was when you send the report to IBM right at the very beginning, All right, so let's talk about negotiating pricing. Is this how you do it? And I'm a big fan of Dilbert. Those of you that have attended any of my sessions before, I have used this a couple of times. Take 30 seconds for you to read it. All right, hopefully that's brought a smile to everybody's face. All right, contract negotiations. How do you negotiate with IBM and some of the ISVs? Remember the IBM license models, and let's pick out IBM on this one. Understand what the IBM quota and how it's arranged. And I don't mean to say that you need to understand the dollar amount because you probably won't find that out. But a lot of IBM people have quotas. They have a 12-month quota that's split into 2 6-month parts. And each 6-month portion, probably a better word, is allocated a certain amount. So the first 6 months, they may have to get 35% of their quota. And the second 6-month part is 65% of their quota. So it's weighted, and it's encouraged that the sales guys and the sales teams get their quota as early as possible, because if they hit that 35% in that first 6 months, they're going to get onto accelerators, and they'll get more money, their sales team will get more money. So it's a good thing for IBM. And you're probably sitting here thinking, why should we put more money in IBM's pocket? Just bear with me on this. IBM themselves know where all of their IBM renewal agreements are coming from. They've got, I won't say a spreadsheet, but I will say a spreadsheet, but they know exactly where all the money is coming from each company right across the world. So if you understand how the sales guys are remunerated, they're encouraged to try to get in as much money as early as possible, because they'll get paid more, their team will get paid more. That's a good thing. The thing that I always suggest is, once you understand that, understand what the salesman can agree to, because again, it's a negotiation session. Now, can you, always ask this question, can you bring in your IBM renewal earlier, 6 months earlier or a year earlier than what it's due? And the reason I say that is because if you can bring it in earlier and get it done, and it has to really be done, at least 6 months earlier in an earlier period, that revenue will be then recognized for IBM, and it will be recognized as revenue that they got in earlier. That will be good for IBM. It can even affect their stock price. But what it does for you, the customer, is it gives you much more negotiation ability. So you can maybe get a better price. You can certainly haggle for more or negotiate for better terms and conditions. You may get more product. You can even, as I say, you can even get it at less cost, because it's in everybody's best interest to get that agreement in early. So if you can bring your agreement into IBM early, that's great. Bring it into an earlier period. Everybody wins, and it does work out there. I've been on several of these where we've successfully saved several $1 million. Now, having said that, understand what the IBM salesperson can do, and they will work with you on this. All right. So it is something that I always think about and say, look, let's do this if you can do it. And there are companies out there, not me, because I work for Zitali. There are companies out there that specialize in this. And even after paying them, you'll save money. Question, why have I got an IBM 360 up there? It's probably, well, it is. This was the first mainframe I ever worked on. All right, so do we go MLC or do we go full capacity? And then what flavor? What is monthly license charge? MLC. MLC is a recurring charge that is applied monthly. Most companies have been on some form of MLC charge. The latest flavor of IBM licensing, and I understand, and I like TFP. What is tailored fit pricing? It's a very flexible software pricing model, but there are 5 different flavors of it. It offers alternative to the rolling 4-hour average. Well, on 4 of them it does. There's one that still uses the 4-hour rolling average. And of course, there's full capacity based license. So if you have a mainframe with 5,000 MSUs, that's what you're going to get charged for every time. And I pulled this off of the IBM website, and you'll get a copy of these slides. So, if you want more detail, you can go get them. So now, I mentioned earlier about monthly license options and the IBM licensing. There's lots of different flavors of it. Some of these are now getting a bit old, but they're still around. And just remember that with a lot of these license options, they only work, or they only run, or IBM will only allow you to use them on specific hardware. So if you want to go to TFP, which we've got over on the right-hand side, and you're on a Z11 or Z12, IBM won't let you use it. And I'm sure somebody will correct me, but I believe you're going to be on a Z14 or a Z15. So TFP, tailor fit pricing, has been around since 2017. And now there are currently 5 different flavors. Most people will know the software enterprise consumption and the development and test solution. Software enterprise consumption is, I think it's quite good. In fact, it's very good. Basically, to get into it, I'll give you a very high-level overview. You take a baseline of the MSUs that you've been using for the last 12 months. Sometimes it's 6 months, but mostly it's 12 months. And you then agree that you will pay the average of that baseline every month to IBM, and you'll commit to paying that for the length of the contract. So at the end of every 12 months, there's a true up. The real benefit is that if you are growing your mainframe, any increase in MSUs over your baseline, IBM will offer you a large discount. And in fact, I've heard from a couple of companies that IBM are being very flexible on this. I'm not going to say how flexible, but I will say they're good. So, here's to you, IBM. So software enterprise consumption, you take a baseline, you commit to paying that for the length of the contract. The questions I always ask is what happens if you miss that amount of MSUs you're going to use for that period? Do you use it or lose it, or do you roll it over? That's something that has to be negotiated. And I was talking to somebody just recently where if they don't hit that magic number, they just lose their MSUs and they start again. The clock starts ticking. So we talked about this, and there's not a lot we can do in the short term, but they are renegotiating their IBM agreement early. Enterprise capacity, that's where every MSU on the mainframe is paid for, like full capacity. Hardware consumption solution. This is relatively new. I think it came out I first saw a paper on it or a presentation, I think it was about February or March, and it still wasn't completely GA at that stage. And this is a little bit like capacity on demand. But you just turn it on for a very small period of time, like hours, and then you turn it off. And I thought, yeah, that's quite a good idea, for those odd spikes. However, there are some little drawbacks, like you have to subscribe to it. So, you have to subscribe to this, so you have to pay a fee. When you turn it on, again, there is a turning on fee. And then for the additional MSUs you use for 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever the time period is, you have to pay for those as well. So just go a little careful, because when you're looking at your expenses, this could cost you money. New application solution. You got a new application coming onto the mainframe, IBM are great. They'll give you huge discounts for this. And last but not least, the dev and test solution. This is the one where we talk about it still uses the 4-hour rolling average to manage it. You end up with a container, dev test container, and you run all your development and test stuff in there. But again, IBM are very good with this in the sense that what they do is they will give you a very high watermark that you probably aren't going to reach. All right, there's my 2-minute spiel on MLC. Some of the other older MLC license options, which you've probably seen, workload license charge, parallel sysplex. VUE is making a bit of a comeback. I see IBM are really pushing that as well. So understand what you're doing, understand your licenses that are being put in front of you, and really work on it. If not, ask somebody else. As I said, there are companies out there that do this. So now you've negotiated your licenses, and a lot of these rules apply to the ISVs as well. I work for an ISV, and it works for me, and I try to help companies understand the combination of agreements, all the stock standard things. So what is next after this? Let's identify the high expense hitters. Ensure we have control over expenditure and can meet the budget. A lot of the end users, the businesses, they have no idea of what expense they're causing the company. And often if you can identify it to them, they will look at it and maybe they can run their workload at a different time, which can reduce the amount of MSUs used or contribute to the 4-hour rolling average. So budget, and again, let's go back to my friend Dilbert. How do you negotiate or how do you discuss your budget internally? Hopefully you don't do it like that, but I've seen some awful examples of this. That's not to say that I think that you are, but I have seen them out there. Why do we need a budget? Well, this is a fundamental framework for your business and your finances. Within IT, it's one of the things that if your IT department goes over budget, oh, big slap on the wrist. The point I liked is here in point 3, understand what business unit is exceeding their mainframe usage versus underperformers, because that can really help you set your IT budget for the following year. And if you don't understand this, or you can't see it, then it's really hard to control and justify you're at the expense of the mainframe. Chargeback. A lot of companies don't use chargeback. Some of them do, some of them don't actually charge it, but they just produce costs. But I think it's quite a good thing, whether it's funny money, as I say, you don't actually charge it, but you just report on it. But it helps you justify the mainframe and where the high expense hitters are. Aligns with the business. Promotes the efficient use of IT resources, because if you can say to somebody, as I mentioned earlier, hey, you are costing this within your organization, most departments are very good at saying, yeah, I understand, we'll try and help us work through it to reduce it. There's a number of financial mainframe packages out there. A lot of them are, let's say, mature, CA or CA Broadcom, JARS, MIX, ITRM, IBM, ZTDS, I think that's probably one of the more modern ones, and the MXG, which has been around for years and years and years, Barry Merrill, which I'm sure most of you know. But do they slice and dice IBM MLC allocation? The answer to that is probably no. So if you've got MLC build, you want to be able to slice and dice it and identify who are the culprits driving it up. What workload contributes to the rolling 4-hour average? Is it batch online? Is it start a task? I talk to a lot of people and they say to me, yeah, we can do that, but we just do it in MSUs. But we really need to be able to do it in dollars or pounds or euros in some currency. It means a lot more, and you've got a lot better control over it. If you look at the SCRT or your scratch report, that doesn't really help. It's very good for saying how many MSUs were used by CICS or DB2 or whatever, ZOS, IMS, etc. But it doesn't give you a dollar amount. I actually know a couple of companies that did have, that took the SCRT, put it into an Excel spreadsheet and came out with a dollar amount. They got it wrong too many times and there were too many changes. They just threw it away. It didn't really help them at all. So how much does the workload contribute to the rolling 4-hour average, and what effect does that have on the critical path? Because if you can take it out of being a contributor to the 4-hour rolling average and not affect the critical path, then you're doing your job. You're saving money. All right, what is cost control? Analytics, trends, forecasting, make sure that we can see what is going on. Make sure that whatever system you're using, and there are quite a few analytical solutions out there on the mainframe, you can understand it. Everybody's into analytics these days. I think it's great. I'm really enjoying this in the last couple of years, depending on what flavor of analytics you're using. So what you pay for your current production, get in near real-time consumption and dollar costs. Where does your cost come from? Find out what are the workloads that are costing you money. Understand the cost factors, trends, distribution between software. How do you automate the chargeback process if you're going to do this? And again, I think companies really, I don't see enough chargeback out there, but I think it's a great thing. It is not the simplest thing to set up, but I think it's worthwhile looking into. Your annual budget. I guess I probably should have put this slide first, because this is the one. Where do you stand with your annual budget? Are you above it, below it? Can we do trending based on what is going on? Over here in the States, we've got I was talking to a supermarket chain just yesterday, and probably their top, their busiest time of the year is coming up in about 2 weeks due to Thanksgiving. The amount of people that are going into the stores there, their forecasts go through the roof, but they don't do any trending on this. They don't do any forecasting, crystal ball gazing. And I was absolutely amazed about it. But we hopefully are going to work with them to change that. Contractual overruns. I talked about tailored fit pricing, where you have to commit to a certain amount of MSUs. You want to be able to make sure that you understand how many MSUs you're using. If it's TFP or CMP or AWLC, and consumption models, and not just in MSUs, but also in dollars. You want to be able to forecast forward trending. How do you know which pricing model to choose? And I've covered, and hopefully I haven't confused too many people. Most people have heard of these, but which one do you choose? Which is best for my business? And again, that's something that, is a sit down at a table and discuss in depth. Simulate the different pricing models. And we can help you do that. There are tools out there that do that. All right, so if you can simulate, okay, this is my workload that I've done for the last 6 months, I want to model it. If I choose a different type of IBM license model, what effect will that have on my bill? Cost contributors to the rolling 4-hour average, identify them, not just in MSUs, but in dollar amounts. And I'm very keen on this, being able to say, hey, this particular job name contributed X amount of dollars to the 4-hour rolling average. Manage the defined capacity dynamically. And depending on the type of IBM license model, you've got CMP, you got TFP. And again, if you've got the test dev container, that's still managed by the 4-hour rolling average. AWLC, and even VUE. Some companies have multiple different combinations. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago that got both TFP and VUE, and they're outsourced, which kind of made me scratch my head, which is another point. All right, multiple needs. Control your billings will help you reduce your costs. I think hopefully we've got that through. LPAR level, performance control. Optimize your MSU allocations to make sure that you guarantee your SLAs. Being able to report on the fly. Remember, most companies run their SCRT at the beginning of the month for the previous month, and it doesn't tell you much anyway. You need to be able to do it on a much more regular basis. Understand what is driving up your bills. Dynamically modify the DC, defined capacity of an LPAR. Hopefully everybody understands how the rolling 4-hour average works. How does the billing work? What does the SCRT do for you? I know people that say the SCRT, they really think that they like it. It does enough for them. I don't think it does enough. What about setting how many MSUs you want to pay for? If your organization is being billed overly for 500 MSUs, why not be able to set it at 450 and still be able to meet your SLAs? And this is where we start talking about flying MSUs, where if an LPAR is not using the MSUs, another LPAR can, and not contribute to the 4-hour rolling average. Use the white space that's available. LPAR's defined capacity can be increased, decreased based on LPAR priority and the workload. In general principle, and this is something that I think every organization that has AWLC especially, and there are still a lot of those over there, especially if you're outsourced, analyze the situation of each LPAR at regular intervals. The interval duration is set by the user, usually 1 to 2 minutes, and then the system determines when the next builds up a profile of that LPAR, and then we'll look at it, and then we'll move out MSUs as and when needed. It doesn't move them, it makes them available for other LPARs. General principle, if the IMSU, the instantaneous MSU, is less than the rolling 4-hour average, we'll decrease the DC to just above the rolling 4-hour average. And if the IMSU is above the rolling 4-hour average, we'll increase the DC to above the rolling 4-hour average. All right, let's look at an example very simplistically. You got an LPAR, you got 3 LPARs. One's got 50 MSUs, one's got 35, one's got 70. All right, next time around, all of a sudden LPAR 1 needs more MSUs, so it takes them from LPAR 2. And LPAR 3 also needs more. So you've got this rolling defined capacity, and hence the term flying MSUs. They're being available to other LPARs. And we have found that if you do this in a data center, you'll reduce your IBM MLC bill by between anything from 7 to 12% and still meet your SLAs. All right, sorry, dynamically modify the DC. I think I've kind of discussed that already. Web reporting, again, need to understand your usage right throughout the month, but down at a detailed level. Understand what you're doing, what LPARs are protected, how the DC is changing for an LPAR graphically and numerically. So the MLC cost control solution results, it impacts a direct impact on the SCRT with controlled billing level. So you can save a lot of MSUs. Flexible soft capping. A number of companies use the IBM solution, GCL. Very good. Well, it's good, but it does have some drawbacks, and I won't go into those at the moment, but happy to talk to you about it afterwards. In summary, we're right on time. Initiate a virtual circle between cost, performance, and usage. And it's an ongoing, because it's changing it all the time. Optimize and reduce mainframe costs. Again, identify your cost reduction opportunities. Who is driving up your expenses? Identify it. And I have found, and I've said this so many times, if you can go to the business and say, hey, look, you cost us this amount of money, can we run your workload at a slightly different time? So if they are contributing to the 4-hour rolling average, maybe they don't contribute quite so much. Knowledge is your power over expenditure. Understand your cost structure. When you're told we've got to reduce the cost of the mainframe, unless you understand who is driving your costs up and what is happening, you can't. You've got to be able to measure it to be able to manage it. The point there that I make the case for mainframe competitiveness. A lot of companies, mainframe is not going away, even though we've heard, yeah, we're going to get rid of the mainframe. I got some friends that have said that to me since the early 90s. Guess what? They're still on the mainframe. We talked a little bit about contract negotiation, and I just touched on it. I actually really enjoy getting involved in understanding what the best IBM license is, and working out the best way we can save companies money. And I say this, but IBM themselves want the mainframe to survive. It's very much in their interest. You hear lots of noise about the mainframe. They want it to survive, and it is growing. And, you think about some of the newer technology that's out there, it's brilliant. So contract negotiation, understand what your best pricing model is. And if you're outsourced, that's a slightly different kettle of fish. But by all means, please come talk to me about working with your outsourcer. I do a session on helping to keep the outsourcer honest. That's not to say they're dishonest, but what it does say is that you've got to work with them much closer to have a win-win situation. And that is it. I think I said I'd take about 45 minutes and we're right on the number. So I would like to thank you very, very much. Hopefully you've either had some lunch or you're about to go and get any lunch. If there's any questions, please ask them or put them in the chat box. Right at the very beginning of this slide deck, I had my emails there, so happy to answer any questions. And on that note, Piara, I will hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, Brian. If anyone has got any questions, please feel free to leave it in the chat box. Brian can answer them whilst he's here with us. Or if you've got any thoughts, comments. Oh yeah, we've got one coming from Stephen Hoare. He's asking how much of the 10% other was power costs?
Do you know what? I really don't know. That was that chart was taken from an analyst. But thank you for asking. I will find out and I will come back to you on that. I've never been asked that. Wow. Will you bear with me and let me find out? I'll get
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no worries. I work with Stephen, so yeah, you can also let me know and I can pass it on to Stephen. So
Stephen at Lloyds Bank as well.
Yeah.
I first started my career at Lloyds Bank many moons ago, so maybe we could have a Lloyds Bank renewal.
Yeah, any other questions? If you want to come up on stage, I can also unmute you. Just let me know. I'll just give it a few more seconds if anyone's got any other comments or feedback or anything they want to leave in the chat box.
All I can say, Stephen, is I like your surname, but you don't quite spell it correctly.
Yeah, it's very similar to yours without the E.
Thanks for the comment, Jeff.
Yeah, right. There's no other questions coming through. As a reminder to everyone that's tuned in, please feel free to leave the session feedback. I've left a link in the chat box, and yeah, we'd really appreciate if you could donate to the nominated charities as well. Brian, thank you for your time. I know it's very early for you over in the States. Really appreciate the presentation. It was excellent. You know, I learned so much. And yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in as well.
All right, my pleasure, Piara, thank you. I'm going to go and get some breakfast, and hopefully any other questions, just work with Piara or send me an email directly. All right, you guys, take care, and thank you very much for putting up with me for the last hour. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.